Hello everyone, how are you all doing? So today we are gonna see, what if Naruto x Yugito, part 4, hope you enjoy the video, let's start the video. In an instant, Yamato was at the front door of the hospital and rushed to the closest medic. Unfortunately the medic wasn't too fond of the bloody mess in his arms. The demon again. Just let it die already. Yamato growled in anger and was about to pull rank when a massive amount of killing intent hit both of them. Inyazaku Tsume was visiting Hana in the hospital as she had injured herself during her genin test when she attacked her sensei and missed Suga. Needless to say, the results weren't pretty when she snapped her right arm and left leg when she collided with a tree. As she was happily chatting with her daughter, she felt the spike and rushed out of the room after telling Hana she would be right back. Once she had reached the door, because wasn't allowed inside the building, the spike had already stopped and Yamato was just behind her with a bloodied mess in her hands. Once she noticed who it was and hearing the medic refused to help him, her animalistic side took over. No one messed with her godson. She would have taken him in when he was younger, but due to Minato's request before he sealed Kyuubi, he wanted Naruto to live a humble life, not a pampered one like that he would have if he lived with a clan. Shaking that thought off, she unleashed an unreal amount of killing intent and focused it on the poor medic. Yamato, sensing the danger known as an enraged female Inyazaku, wisely leapt out of the way when she bluntly grabbed the medic and started shaking him. So, it's your duty to heal any person that comes into this hospital. As she was bluntly shaking the unfortunate medic, though he did deserve it, others came out to see what the noise was about and noticed Naruto's bloody form in Yamato's arms. Unlike the first medic, most of them were elder shinobi and knew that Naruto was Naruto and grabbed a stretcher and placed him on it. The head medic quickly used a diagnostic and gasped in fright at the extent of the wounds. He began barking orders faster than Yamato could hear and they quickly rushed Naruto to the emergency room. Yamato would have followed, but he was still slightly petrified at the sight of the Inyazaku clan head strangling the medic before delivering a knee to his groin. He winced at this and felt a small pang of sympathy for the man, but that was it. Shaking that off, he headed towards the emergency room with Tsume not too far behind him. A few hours later in the waiting room, an unconscious Anko, an oddly quiet guy, a brooding Kakashi, a worried Sandaime Hokage, a slightly nervous Tsume, a pacing Yugao, a sullen Yamato, and a dressed Yugito were waiting as the light was still on in the emergency room. Anko was knocked out as Sarutobi placed her in a powerful position as not even the combined strength of everyone in the room besides Yugito could keep her from attempting to barge into the room, wanting to know what was going on. Yugito had nothing physically wrong with her other than a few bruises and a mild concussion, and that was easily healed. Of course they had tried to rape her and they knew there would be some after effects on her psyche, but that wasn't bothering her right now. Naruto's condition was. She had felt Nibi grow unsettled a few times during the wait and it was as if she knew something bad was happening in the emergency room. Kakashi was leaning up against a wall with his Anbu mask tied to his belt. He oddly enough didn't have his precious orange book out and had a look of worry on his face. His arms were crossed as he kept passing glances at the door every few minutes before returning to his stoic brooding that was kind of reminiscent of a certain Uchiha. Yugao currently was wearing down the tiled floors as she continued pacing back and forth. Her mask was tied to her belt as well, but she looked like a mess. She, much like Anko, considered Naruto her little brother and knew he had similar feelings, though he didn't show them. It was taking all of her patience and will to keep from barging in there to find out what was taking so long. Sarutobi was worried for Naruto, as well as the consequences of this night. One was the people in the room. If Naruto didn't pull through, he knew it would be bad. He knew Kakashi would just brood and Guy would use his youthful mask, as they always did, but Anko and Yugao were two totally different stories. He wasn't sure what Yugao would do, but he knew damn well that Anko would go on a killing spree. Ever since she returned from being marked by Orochimaru as he betrayed Konoha, they had treated her like she was Orochimaru herself. They used her as an outlet due to there being no others. Though it seemed that she took it merely in stride, the truth was far from that. On the inside, she was in pain. Unbearable pain that few could ever hope to understand. He on a few occasions had caught her trying to commit suicide and even one seppuku, but each time he managed to convince her not to. He tried to get her to explain why, but each time she would clam up and he'd get nothing out of her. That's why when she found Naruto receiving the same treatment, he was glad. She took him in and gave him some form of affection that he never had, and he did the same for her, even if it was in the weirdest ways. They had found a way to ease the pain that didn't involve cutting, self-torment, and their masks. Sarutobi sighed as he looked at her unconscious form. Both she and Naruto were more like each other than he, nor they would ever admit. He sighed once more before turning to Yugito before wincing. Another problem was that if Kumo had managed to learn what had nearly happened to her, they could use it against them, as her mother was a well-renowned figure before she passed away. I bring more jobs to the other shinobi nations, seeing that Konoha couldn't be trusted. Sure, they could have Yugito make a statement to counter that, but it wouldn't make a whole lot of difference, as the fact that his shinobi tried and nearly succeed in raping her if Naruto hadn't gone berserk. He sighed once more as he looked around the room again and was wondering what was going to happen over the next couple of days. He was brought out of his thoughts when the light above the door went off and the medical team walked out with a stretcher and a heavily bandaged Naruto on top of it. Everyone there let out a sigh of relief knowing he was okay, and Sarutobi walked towards the head medic, Hakiri Miyuki, for some answers. The said medic sighed, already knowing what the Hokage wanted, decided to give it now so she could get some sleep after depleting most of his chakra. Hokage-sama, we did all we could and we managed to save him. If he was anyone else, we wouldn't have been able to. Sarutobi flinched at this, as the medic spoke in a solemn, soft tone, so no one else could hear it. Hokage-sama, I won't lie, there were a few times that he nearly passed away, and each time we barely managed to keep him in this world. If it wasn't for it healing him along with us, he would have. Sometimes the boy's curse is his greatest gift. Anyways, it will take some time for him to completely recover from Hokage-sama. He needs good rest and nutritious foods, and he'll be running around in no time. The medic finished on a slightly happier and louder tone than before, so the rest could hear it. Sarutobi smiled slightly hearing that and nodded slowly as he looked at the young boy laying on the stretcher. He absently noticed that Yugito was already by his side, but he figured it was from the shock of what happened. Shaking his head from that, he motioned for the medics to take him to his room as he released Anko. Anko sprang up and noticed the light of the room was off and a stretcher in the distance and would have taken off after that if Sarutobi hadn't interrupted her and pulled her into the hallway. Anko, let him rest. He and Yugito needed. She turned to Sarutobi to see his solemn face before taking a deep breath. Anko, you remember the request you've been asking for the last couple of months? Her eyes widened in realization as he knew of only one thing that she'd been asking for that long. Adopting Naruto. You mean? Anko stumbled over her own words as the old man smiled sadly at her. After months of bothering Tsume and Anko, he had finally caved in. Minato had asked for him to keep Naruto from being adopted by a shinobi family as he didn't wish to force becoming a shinobi onto him. Little did he realize that only shinobi families would adopt him and they would be limited as most ended up marrying civilians. Yes, Anko-chan. I've reconsidered my decision on allowing your Tsume to adopt him. I have to ask Tsume first as she has been asking for a longer time, but I'm sure she'll accept my decision. Responding to Sarutobi seeing the tears coming down her face out of joy and sadness knowing Tsume would fight to adopt him as well. But this means you have to adopt Yugito as well. In this short time, and after this, the two have bonded. I'm not sure what kind of bond it is, as of now, only the future will say. Anko immediately nodded her head in understanding and wanting to take the young female in as well. Sarutobi smiled lightly before walking back into the thinning waiting room, only to see Tsume and Yamato left. Tsume, if you would please follow me and Anko to my office. I have something I wish to discuss with both of you. Tenzo, you can have the rest of the day off. Yamato nodded as he walked off towards Naruto's room, probably to check on him one last time before leaving. Tsume walked up to them and followed him outside the building before going to his office. He quickly sat in his chair and ignored the fresh stack of paperwork that would make him cry later on before turning to both slightly frightening Kunoichi when they chose to be in front of him. He looked at both before turning to Tsume as he had already said this much to her. Tsume, as I was explaining to Anko in the hallway, I have reconsidered on allowing one of you to adopt him. She smiled lightly as she knew both her and Anko had been asking for a while as the Hokage continued. But, as I said with Anko, to adopt Naruto, you have to adopt Yugito as well. She has managed to get Naruto to show more emotion in these few weeks than he has shown in the last year. Also, I believe she is what Naruto needs right now. He needs someone he knows is like him and helps him deal with his problems, and the same goes for her. She might not be showing anything as of now, but nearly being raped does some psychological damage, even if only a little compared to it actually happening. Sarutobi said remorsefully at the end. The two Kunoichi flinched as they knew it was more than true as they had been around their fair share of women that had been raped during wartime and/or missions with thugs and bandits that had taken some for their pleasure. He sighed lightly as he turned to each Kunoichi seeing who was the better to raise them as he knew both would take them in. Anko had her ups and downs. She was bloodthirsty, had mood swings that rivaled that of pregnant women, a bad temperament, threw random people at people, and was a bad overall role model. On the other hand, she was genuinely kind to Naruto and Yugito in her own twisted way, and she cared for Naruto almost like that of a son. Plus they wouldn't have to move out of the apartment as she lived just next door. On the other hand, had more ups. She was a kind, when not angered, somewhat temperamental yet stable parental figure for the two. She had experience in parenting, as she had both Hana and Kiba, and both of them were being raised right. The only problem with taking them in was that she would have to spread her time around for all four of them, while Anko would just have the two. He sighed as he rubbed his temple, trying to determine who was the better choice. It was frustrating him to no end, and both could see it. They were both good, his only choices. He sighed deeply as he turned to both of them. For now, give me time to think. I cannot decide with all that has happened now. I will call you back when I have made my choice. Both Kunoichi nodded and left the room, leaving the old Hokage by himself. He looked out of the room and smiled sadly as he looked towards Yondame's head and began wondering how things would be if only he had done this instead of him. After a few moments of thoughts around those lines, he shook his head and turned to his paperwork, and for once he didn't mind doing it. A few days had passed and Naruto had yet to wake. Yugito was sleeping silently on the extra bed they had put in the room for her as she refused to leave. Everyone had tried to convince her that she needed to rest, but she said she was staying here and that was final. After a while, they had given up and Anko and Yugao managed to convince the staff to bring in another bed for her. She slowly turned and rolled in her sleep as the memories of a few days ago came to her. She shivered lightly as she wrapped the blankets around her even tighter than before. She never had anything like that happen to her before and was finally beginning to understand what Naruto had to go through day in and day out. The memories kept hitting her every time she fell asleep. Yet she would always calm down when she saw Naruto in the dream and when she awoke. Something about his presence was soothing her and she didn't want that to go away for now. Not till these dreams stopped. But this dream was far worse than the others. She shuddered heavily as the man actually entered her, unlike the others. After a few moments her shuddering ceased as she started to scream in her sleep, waking the other occupant in the room and alerting a few nurses and medics nearby. Naruto's eyes snapped open as he heard Yugito's screaming and started to look around before noticing that she was in the bed next to his. He tried to move but yelped a bit in pain as his wounds were still fresh, but that didn't matter to him right now. He pushed himself off the bed and slowly limped his way towards the screaming girl. Once he reached her, he noticed her tense position as she gripped the bed tightly and had her back arched a bit as if she was. Realization dawned on him that she must be reliving that night again, but this time it was actually happening. Doing the only thing he could think of, he reached down and grabbed Yugito's shoulders and shook her lightly to wake her up. He was glad when her screaming stopped as her eyes snapped open and looked at him with sweat drenching her face. Blinking a few times and letting everything come into focus, she noticed Naruto covered head to toe in bandages standing in front of her with his arms on her shoulders. Normally she would have told him to get back to his bed as he was still too hurt to be moving, but she wasn't in a normal state. Her arms shot out and wrapped around his waist as she buried herself into Naruto's chest and started to cry a bit. Naruto was confused as to what was going on, but having the same kind of reaction himself once, he knew what to do instinctively. He slowly slid one of his arms around her waist as he stroked her scalp lightly. He wasn't 100% sure what he was doing, but it seemed to be working as she had begun to calm down. So he continued to stroke her hair and hold her closely, even if it was hurting him. After a few more moments, he noticed her become slack and fell back towards the bed, bringing him with her. Naruto blinked in surprise as he laid beside the. This was foreign territory for him. He'd rather take another beating than this, cause at least then he knew what was going to happen. And it wasn't helping that his hand was obeying him at the moment as it kept stroking Yugito's hair, making her emit a weird sound that was a cross between a growl and a bee buzzing. From outside the room, the nurses and medics couldn't help but smile at the scene. It was one of the most adorable things they had seen before, especially with Naruto looking around for help as he had no clue what to do. At the same time in the council room, Sarutobi was staring down the entire council. There were 15 seats in the council, but normally only 11 showed up to the meetings. He normally never had to call the entire council, as the clan heads and elders mostly agreed on everything, making it pointless for the other council members to come, as they couldn't overrule a majority vote. This was one of those few times it was mandatory for all of them to be there. Other than himself, the council was made of the clan's heads of the Hyuga, Uchiha, Inyazaku, Akamichi, Nara, Yamanaka, and Abiram. There also were the Sandame's old teammates Hamura and Kaharu. Danzo, Sarutobi's former opponent for the position of Hokage, and the leader of Roots. The other four were the richest civilians in Konoha, Yami Karinka, Mayo Kane, and Haruna Ryo. The final member of the council was only a member due to her husband dying and leaving her the only one available to take the seat till their daughter retired from her shinobi career. She was Haruno Momo, the current head of the hospital staff. None of them knew why they were here today, besides Tsume, as she was there in the waiting room, but the look on the Hokage's face told them that he was restraining himself from letting loose a fury on them. It was mainly directed at the civilian members and Danzo, but that didn't really matter, as everyone else was in the way. Yawning out loud, Haruno Momo looked around the room and ignored the tense atmosphere as the clan heads were figuring out where this was going and decided to get this over with. What is this about Hokage-sama? It better have nothing to do with the demon child again. She spat out the last part with venom lacing her voice. She had respected the Hokage till he started protecting the demon child and putting up laws and assigning Anbu to protect him. Sarutobi glared at her for a few seconds before doing something that made everyone in the room freak out. He smiled. And not his normal, warm, loving smile. This one he had to learn from Orochimaru, as it clearly said, "I'm psychotic right now, so I'm going to torture you 1,000 possible ways before raping you." Taking a deep breath, he spoke in a clear and commanding voice. As you all know what happened to Miss Nai and one Uzumaki Naruto a few days ago. Each of the clan heads and elders, beside Danzo, flinched hearing this, while the rest just snorted in response, not really caring, as both were demons in their opinions. Momo rolled her eyes at him and spoke up venomously. "Of course I know that. I had to cover up the near raping of the wench to keep Kumagakure from know for fear of retaliation. The only ones to know of it are in this room other than the medic that had checked up on her. As for the demon brat, they should have let him die." He glared viciously at her before three Anbu appeared behind him looking at the women in contempt. "It seems Kumo has already learned of this event and is using it against us already by spreading it around to the other villagers and potential employers that Konoha shinobi are not to be trusted. Now I don't believe I need to tell you how this can hurt our economy, otherwise none of you would be able to be on this council. The other purpose of this meeting is to try and root out the spy amongst us." Each member's eyes widened at his statement and started looking at the others, except oddly enough Danzo, who looked like he wasn't surprised. Sarutobi narrowed his eyes at this, but he had nothing on the old warhawk and couldn't do anything, as of yet. "I'm not saying it is one of us, but the probability it is very high. But, as of the moment, I have nothing, I can only suspect. But for now, we have to deal with the impact these events will have." The members nodded and were about to leave, figuring this was the end of the meeting, when Sarutobi spoke in a deep powerful voice, making everyone sit back down in fear. "The next thing I have for today is that I have made a new law that will protect Naruto from." He was allowed to finish, as the civilians and Momo cried out in rage for protecting him, while Danzo was seething mentally at hearing his. The Sandane was already in a bad mood and they weren't helping him as of this moment, so he shut them up with one word laced with killing intent that made Kyuubi seem like nothing. Silence. All four civilians shrunk back along with the rest of the council, never having seen the old Hokage like this before. "Now, as I was saying before I was interrupted, I have created a new law like the first I made for him. But with a few differences. This one will keep events like this from happening again. It will be considered treason for breaking this law, and you all know the punishments for treason." Everyone gulped in fear hearing this and shrunk back further in their seats as they nodded. The penalty for treason 75% of the time was execution, but if the Hokage was feeling kind, it would be life in prison with no parole. But Sarutobi wasn't finished yet. "In addition, if you are found to have done this before, the offender will have to go through a week with our head interrogator, Marino Ibiki, before being executed. If the offender happens to be a shinobi, their rank will be stripped from them and will be buried as a civilian, not as a shinobi, and their names will not be placed on the memorial stone, even if they had the credentials. This law is in effect from this moment on, till Naruto dies from old age or inaction." Suddenly the three Anbu behind Sarutobi wearing a Inu, Tora, and Ryo mask appeared besides Momo and restrained her before placing chakra cuffs on her arms and legs. "Haruno Momo, you are hereby sentenced to execution in 3 days for being a repeat offender. Your rank of the head of the hospital is stripped along with your status as a council member, and you will not have a shinobi burial." Her eyes widened as she continued to struggle more, but it was in vain, as the three Anbu had already caught her and were dragging her to Ibiki for a special session. The rest of the council members were in shock seeing this, except Tsume, who seemed slightly pleased, as she never did like the woman. Danzo's eyes narrowed at this and gritted his teeth. This would set his plans back. He didn't expect the old man to regain his backbone. Sarutobi gives her a cold glare at him, knowing that the Warhawk was up to something and was going to watch him closely in years to come. But he'd be damned if he was going to allow this any longer. He was no longer going to live in the shadow of his successor, as he had done the last 8 years. Shaking that thought off, he turned back to the rest of the council. This meeting is finished. You're dismissed. Tsume, I want you in my office in 10 minutes. He turned around quickly and walked out of the door with no visible emotion on his face. Though you could see in his eyes that there was anger for what she had done to Naruto, but sadness that he had to resort to this. He shook his head as he entered his office and sat in his chair before turning to the Hokage monument. As he reached Yandame's head, a light smile crept onto his face. Minato, I will not let you down anymore. I will no longer allow this to happen to your son. Now to find a way to get Jiraiya here. He shook his head and turned towards his paperwork and was about to start on it when the door opened, revealing both Anko and Tsume. He was surprised both were here 5 minutes early, then he realized they probably had figured out why he wanted to see them. He shook his head as he pulled out his pipe and lit it before speaking. I guess both of you know why you have been called. Both gave each other a quick look before nodding, as they knew all too well. Sarutobi nodded as he glanced outside towards the monument before back at them. To tell you the truth, I cannot decide for myself. Both of you have your up and down points, making it difficult to choose. So I'm going to leave it in your hands to decide who will adopt him and Yugito. Anko's eyes widened hearing this, while Tsume's jaw unhinged itself. He was leaving it in their hands to decide. That either meant that he really couldn't decide for himself or wanted them to go over who would give them the best care. After a few seconds of numbly standing there, both nodded and turned to the other and headed outside the room so they didn't bother the Hokage as he did his paperwork. Once they were outside, they looked at each other and sized them up as if they were about to fight. Tsume motioned Anko to follow her and she did so as she led her into a vacant room. They both sat down at the table in the middle of the room and continued to size the other up, seeing if they were worthy of taking care of the two. After a few more moments of staring at the other, Tsume was the first to break the silence. So why exactly do you want to adopt Naruto? This wasn't the first question that came to her mind, but her answer would help her immensely in her decision. She knew that looking after Hana and Kiba was a trial on its own, but adding a silent Naruto and a shell-shocked Yugito, and there would be hell in the household, as Kiba couldn't keep still and didn't like anything that smelled like cats. Anko was surprised at her question, as she really didn't expect it. She was expecting something more on the lines of why she was qualified to look after the two of them. Maybe Tsume deemed her good enough in that area for it not to matter. Shaking that thought off, she thought over why she did want to look after the blonde-haired and Yugito. She knew she loved Naruto like a little brother, maybe a son, as he had experienced the darker side of the village and was treated like she was. When she first found him, she couldn't help but try to help him as he reminded her so much of herself. As for Yugito, the girl was already kind of like her in many ways. She had a sadistic streak, was volatile when she chose to be, and just seemed to have a certain aura around her that made her all the more likable. Thinking for a few more minutes, she looked up at Tsume and answered. It's because they remind me of myself. Naruto for living through the hell the villagers give him for being Kyuubi's jailer, just like I have to live with the crap they give me for being Orochimaru's apprentice. Yugito, as she is already more like me than I thought. I want to adapt to them to keep them near me, as they are all I have other than my shinobi career. They are two of the brightest lights in my life. Tsume's eyes widened for a brief second before looking thoughtful, as she looked down at Kuramaru, who had been following her the entire time. She growled a bit at him and did so back, confirming her suspicions. Anko wasn't lying, in fact she had spoken straight from her heart. Most of the doubt and worry left her, as she knew Anko was more than capable of taking care of them, and now that she knew the reason why she wished for the adoption, she could allow it. Go ahead. Anko blinked at Tsume in confusion, as she didn't understand what she just said. A part of her did, but the more rational part of her brain was going, huh? Tsume shook her head seeing her confusion and spoke up. You can adopt them. I have enough troubles running the clan and watching after Hana and Kiba. I just wanted to confirm your reasons. The snake mistress blinked a few times as she let her words sink in. Then chaos occurred. Anko jumped over the table and hugged the surprised Tsume, as she certainly didn't expect this kind of reaction from Anko. The only thing she could do was glare at the currently snickering Kuramaru. Watching from his crystal ball, Sarutobi smiled as he finished the paperwork for the adoption papers. Now all Anko had to do was sign them. Anko smiled brightly as she walked through the town towards the hospital, frightening everyone along the way as she was happy, and that was not a good thing in their books. She didn't notice them as she was in too good of a mood as she walked into the hospital and headed towards Naruto and Yugito's room holding two papers in her hands as if they were her last lifelines. She smiled brighter as neared the room but blinked in confusion as two nurses stood at the door snickering a bit. Now this didn't sit right with her, as most people in Konoha didn't like Naruto and she was about to go teach them a lesson when she looked into the room. Her lips twitched a few times as she attempted to restrain herself but failed as she began laughing out loud at the helpless Naruto as Yugito held him closely to her as she purred in content. After regaining her composure along with the two nurses, as Anko's laughing had put them over the edge as well, she walked into the room and smirked at the helpless Naruto and winked at him. "My, you work fast, don't you? And here I thought I was going to have to find someone to break you of that." Naruto looked up at Anko and blinked in confusion as he had no utter clue what she meant, nor did he want to. The sound of finding someone to break him off something didn't seem fun at the moment. Anko sighed and slumped her shoulders. He was still too young to understand what she meant. "You'll know what I'm talking about in a few years." Naruto nodded at her and tried to pull her off, only to see Anko glare at him. "Gaki, if I'm correct, you're supposed to be in bed. So if you move, you're going to be here for much longer." He blinked at her before grumbling, as it seemed that he wasn't getting free of Yugito's grip anytime soon anyways. Anko snickered some more at the scene as the two nurses came in with cameras and started taking some pictures of them. Anko refrained from laughing as Naruto's face became horrified at the prospect of this being caught on film and started struggling even more against her grip, not caring about Anko's threat. After a few moments, the nurses were done with their pictures and thorough embarrassment of one Uzumaki Naruto and left the room with large smiles on their faces while filing this under blackmail. Anko shook her head as she smirked at him and finally took pity on him and released him from Yugito's grip and set him on his bed. Of course she woke the young girl up in the process though. Once she heard Naruto back in his bed, she stepped back a bit so she could get both of them into her view without having to turn her head. She smiled a bit at them before speaking. "Oi. I've got good news for both of you." Both Naruto and Yugito looked towards Anko as she said this and waited for her to continue. "Well, first off, Naruto, you'll be able to leave her within a week if you can stay in bed. And the second is I'm officially guardian of both of you." She let the words seep into their heads and Yugito was the first to figure out what she meant. Then again, she was the older of the two. "You mean you've adopted us?" Yugito stuttered at the beginning but was yelling at the end in surprise. Anko smiled lightly at her and nodded, making Naruto's eyes widen. She smiled at that, as it was rare for Naruto to show emotions, but now he was showing three: hope, happiness and fright. She refrained from grumbling at the last emotion. She was sadistic all the time. Just a good portion of it. Shaking her head at that, she turned back to both of them. "You two will stay in your apartment since it's next to mine, and mine is just too small to inhabit all of us. But anyways, I'll get out of her so you can continue." Foo foo foo. With that statement, Anko left the room leaving a frightened Naruto and a bewildered Yugito as she had no clue on what had happened earlier. After a few more moments of silence, it finally began to sink into Naruto's head at what this truly meant. It meant he had family. For the first time in his life. Thanks for watching my video, sayonara.